Because when we listen to Il Volo, we are not simply hearing three powerful voices singing love songs. We are hearing the survival of an entire literary civilization. Behind the polished arrangements, soaring melodies, and dramatic crescendos lies a form of Italian Romanticism that never fully disappeared. It adapted, it evolved, it learned how to survive inside microphones, streaming platforms, viral edits, and digital fandom culture. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love deep investigations into music, language, poetry, cultural history, and the hidden psychological forces behind modern entertainment, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because today we are uncovering one of the strangest secrets in contemporary music. What if the emotional power of modern Italian pop was never truly modern at all? What if the lyrics, moving millions of listeners across the world, were actually carrying a 200-year-old linguistic code hidden beneath orchestral production and cinematic romance? Most people think Il Volo exists somewhere between opera and mainstream pop. But linguistically, something much deeper is happening. Their music operates like a bridge between the 19th century and 2026. The syntax, metaphors, emotional structures, and poetic vocabulary embedded within their lyrics reveal traces of the same romantic traditions that once defined Italy's greatest poets and composers. And perhaps no ghost looms larger over this conversation than Giacomo Leopardi. Leopardi's work was obsessed with longing, infinity, emotional distance, unattainable beauty, memory, and existential melancholy. His poetry transformed emotional suffering into something almost cosmic. Love was never presented as simple happiness. It was vast, unreachable, eternal, and painfully beautiful. Human desire existed in constant tension with impossibility. Now listen carefully to the emotional architecture of Il Volo's most famous romantic ballads. Songs like Grande Amore do not simply describe affection in casual conversational terms. Instead, they elevate emotion into destiny, obsession, transcendence, and sacrifice. The beloved is rarely portrayed as ordinary. She becomes monumental, almost mythological. Love itself becomes larger than daily reality. This is not accidental. It reflects a deeply rooted romantic structure inherited from 19th century Italian literary traditions. Modern English language pop music often emphasizes immediacy and realism. Relationships are described through direct conversation, personal confession, sarcasm, irony, or emotional fragmentation. But Italian Romanticism historically pursued grandeur. Emotions were stretched toward the sublime. Suffering became theatrical. Distance intensified desire rather than weakening it. This is one reason why modern Italian music can feel strangely epic compared to much of contemporary global pop. The language itself still carries echoes of poetic elevation. And Il Volo amplifies this dramatically. Even their sentence construction frequently resists the rapid conversational shortcuts dominating digital communication culture. Modern internet language favors compression, speed, abbreviations, fragmented syntax, and emotional minimalism. But Il Volo's lyrical phrasing often moves in the opposite direction. Clauses unfold slowly. Sentences breathe dramatically. Emotional declarations are prolonged and ornamented almost like operatic monologues. This connects directly to the traditions of Bel Canto. Bel Canto was never just a singing style, it was a linguistic philosophy. Words were designed to flow musically, allowing emotional emphasis to expand naturally across melodic lines. Italian Romanticism treated language almost like architecture. The rhythm of vowels, consonants, pauses, and phrasing mattered just as much as literal meaning. Poetry was meant to resonate physically as well as intellectually. That same philosophy remains visible in Il Volo's modern compositions. Their lyrics frequently prioritize sonic elegance over modern realism. Even when discussing contemporary emotional experiences, the language often feels suspended outside ordinary time. This is why many listeners describe their music as timeless. The songs intentionally avoid excessive dependence on temporary slang or trend-driven vocabulary. And this is where the linguistic paradox becomes fascinating. In 2026, social media communication is dominated by speed. Texts become shorter, emojis replace adjectives, emotional nuance is compressed into reaction images, abbreviations, memes, and algorithm-friendly captions. Yet Il Volo succeeds globally by embracing the exact opposite strategy. Their lyrical world remains expansive, formal, dramatic, and emotionally maximalist. Why does this still work? Because romantic language activates psychological experiences that modern communication often suppresses. Hearing elevated poetic vocabulary inside mainstream music creates a sense of emotional importance. Listeners subconsciously associate elaborate language with depth, sincerity, and permanence. Romantic syntax slows emotional processing. It forces feelings to linger rather than disappear instantly within endless scrolling culture. This becomes especially clear when we compare older Italian forms of romantic address with modern conversational speech. Traditional Italian romance frequently employed formal expressions such as voi or highly respectful emotional constructions that created distance between lovers. That distance, paradoxically, intensified desire. Romantic tension thrived on restraint, reverence, and unattainability. Modern communication culture usually eliminates that distance completely. Social media encourages instant access, constant availability, and casual familiarity. Yet Il Volo's lyrical identity repeatedly reintroduces emotional grandeur through formalized expression. Love is treated as transformative rather than disposable. And younger audiences surprisingly respond to this powerfully. Gen Z listeners live inside an era of emotional acceleration. Relationships begin and end rapidly. Attention spans fragment constantly. Digital communication often produces emotional exhaustion rather than intimacy. Against that backdrop, romantic language can feel refreshing precisely because it resists disposability. The dramatic poetic inversions found in Italian Romanticism still resonate because they create emotional gravity. Even the structure of melancholy itself has evolved rather than disappeared. 19th-century Romantic poets often connected emotional suffering to landscapes, nature, moonlight, silence, oceans, ruins, or distant horizons. Isolation existed physically. The lonely figure stood alone against mountains, storms, or infinite skies. Modern loneliness looks different. Today's isolation often occurs inside hyperconnectivity. A person may be digitally surrounded by thousands of interactions while feeling emotionally disconnected. Yet Il Volo's lyrical world adapts romantic melancholy to this new environment. The emotional vocabulary remains rooted in longing and idealization, but the context shifts toward modern forms of absence, emotional distance, and fractured intimacy. This is why their music feels simultaneously ancient and contemporary. The emotional DNA survives even as the surrounding world changes. Another fascinating element is the persistence of the tragic hero archetype. Classical opera and romantic literature frequently centered around emotionally overwhelmed figures trapped between passion and destiny. Their feelings were too large for ordinary existence. Suffering became proof of emotional authenticity. Modern pop culture still relies heavily on this archetype, but it often disguises it beneath cinematic editing, viral aesthetics, and social media storytelling. Il Volo's music videos continue presenting love as monumental struggle rather than casual entertainment. Emotional vulnerability is stylized into spectacle, and audiences continue consuming it because romanticism never truly vanished from human psychology. People still crave emotional transcendence, even inside technologically accelerated societies. This becomes especially interesting when examining vocabulary choices. Certain Italian words retain emotional density that modern English equivalents often struggle to reproduce fully. Terms associated with eternity, longing, destiny, impossibility, and overwhelming devotion still dominate operatic pop structures. Even the concept of insuperabile, meaning something impossible to surpass or overcome, reflects a deeply romantic worldview. It implies permanence in an era increasingly defined by replaceability. Modern consumer culture encourages constant novelty. Trends disappear rapidly. Songs explode virally and vanish within weeks. Yet romantic linguistic traditions resist impermanence. They insist that some emotions should remain enduring, overwhelming, and unforgettable. This may explain why Il Volo occupies such a unique space globally. They are not simply preserving Italian Romanticism like a museum artifact. They are actively translating it into contemporary, emotional language. Their music functions almost like a living vernacular system, where 19th-century poetic instincts adapt themselves to modern audiences without fully surrendering their original identity. And perhaps that is why the trio's international success feels so culturally unusual. Many global music industries modernize by simplifying language, shortening emotional structures, and prioritizing immediacy. Il Volo succeeds by preserving complexity. Their songs invite listeners into emotional spaces that feel older, larger, and more ceremonial than ordinary contemporary pop. In a world obsessed with speed, they offer emotional duration. In a culture dominated by irony, they offer sincerity. In an era of disposable trends, they offer permanence. That does not mean Italian Romanticism remains frozen in the 19th century. Far from it. The language continues evolving constantly. New emotional realities reshape old poetic frameworks. Technology changes how longing is experienced. Digital culture changes how absence feels. But the core romantic instinct survives because it speaks to something enduring within human psychology. People still want language capable of making emotion feel infinite, and that may be the true secret hidden inside Il Volo's modern lyrics. Not simply vocal talent, not merely orchestral spectacle, but the survival of a poetic system that has spent 2 centuries evolving without abandoning its emotional soul. The microphones changed, the platforms changed, the audiences changed, but the linguistic DNA remained alive, and every time millions of listeners stream those soaring Italian ballads in 2026, they may unknowingly be participating in a literary tradition that began long before modern pop music ever existed. If you enjoyed this deep linguistic investigation, subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and tell us whether you think romantic language still has a place in modern music culture. Does poetic grandeur feel timeless to you, or has contemporary communication changed the way audiences experience emotion forever?